All right, well, let's get started. Good morning once again. Thank you, everybody, for joining. My name is Skender Daerti, and I am serving as your host today for today's final installment of the Medtech Momentum series, where we talk about taking products from idea to market. I am joined by my esteemed panel of Frank Ripullo, Vas Abramov, and Rob Ferguson today as we take you through this final series. On our last webinar, we talked a lot about risk mitigation. We talked about preparation for submission to the FDA, some good manufacturing practices in development. We talked about pricing strategy, market intelligence, and customer insights. Well, in the evolution of where a product is and how we're going to start today's webinar, we're going to take it from the perspective of the product has been submitted to the FDA, whether it be through a 510K or otherwise. We are waiting for that approval to come through. If you are a small organization or even a large organization waiting to launch a new product, that is the phase that we're starting today's webinar. Okay, so what we really want to focus on at this point is what are the successful go-to-market aspects and go-to-market principles we should be doing. Maybe some of the ones that we should have done and better hurry up to catch up on, okay? And what are some of the things that we need to start to make sure are in line to ensure that we're gonna have a successful market launch, okay? Because everybody knows, first impressions last a lifetime, okay? So you have to come out of that block firing on all cylinders. And it's challenging because there's a lot of capital that is required to go to market. There's a lot of management, there's a lot of oversight, there's a lot of moving parts. Do you have your product ready? Is it ready and commercialized? Is it scalable? Have you properly tested? Is all your shipping set up? Is all your sales channels, or what sales channels are you gonna go through? Do you know the market? Are you just saying we're launching in North America? Or are you saying we're launching in Hartford, Connecticut? All those things are things that you have to have in mind right now. So with that, we're going to start off. Rob Ferguson, here we are, sitting with this critical time period, just watching the clock tick by, waiting for those people at the FDA, the few that are left, to give us some answers on where we are with our product. What are some of the things that are critical to our success that we need to be doing right now, Rob, in order to make for a successful commercialization go-to-market?
Yeah, I mean, well stated, it'd be risk mitigation. And how do you do that, right? So in many cases, whenever you're developing a plan, a business plan, which I'm very, very big on, part of the plan is having the right intel, market data, the landscape information, to be able to solidify and know that you're reducing the bell curve on learning, but you're also now focused on certain levels of intel that you can bank on to apply to your business plan. And for example, one of the first and foremost is going to be what you do, Skender. So I would have to ask you to answer that question about voice of the customer. But in regards to the data intel, I think we've discussed prior of the different type of sources that you can go and get it from. There's just a plethora of them, including AI, which, again, I throw that word out with caution because you got to watch what AI you're using to determine some credible information. But in landscape, we do look at competitors. I mean, that's the obvious. It's going to find out, what are they doing today? What market share they have today? What pricing strategies have they developed around their product? How does their product answer the problem that is out there versus what your product is going to? Are you a me too? Are you are better than, and you have better safety conditions in place? And that's just on one area of intelligence. The others are obviously going to be around the pricing. How are you pricing to the market? Is the value of that product positioned right for the pricing to a contractual organization or even just an end user? And that's just a few areas that it's important for them to look at. So the data intel to solidify a well executable plan is going to be critical.
So, Rob, let me ask you something on what you just said. If you're looking to answer those questions at this point, aren't you already late?
You're very late. You're very late. Matter of fact, that's part of the process with the development that Vas and his team do, is that they should know some of these preliminary intel or information to be able to quantify of why that product does what it does or being developed as it is.
Yeah. No, and thank you for sharing that. Hey, Frank, how about from your perspective? What are some of the things that you're in the commercialization advisory business, and if a company comes to you at this stage, what are you saying? These are the things we have to do right now to ensure success.
It's always been a head scratcher. I'm amazed at how many companies get grant money or sit in incubators and start to develop something without that market intel, right? We have a saying in healthcare, although we don't give away anything for free, we call it standard use programs, but you can give things away free to a health system and they couldn't adopt it because you got to understand where it fits in. And I'm not being cute. I can pick any space. If you don't know how you fit into a DRG in that cost structure, or if you have something that goes beyond the non-acute into a ICD-9 or a CPT code, no one's going to pay for your product. So that has to be figured out first. And then you got to understand, do you truly have a value proposition? Like, it's one thing to say, as an OEM, I have a value proposition. It's another thing to say that it's going to resonate with value analysis teams and it's going to coincide with best practices and the health economics that hospitals look for. Those have to be front and center. Then you develop a product. There used to be, I could develop anything and push it down any channel I want. In my opinion, those days are gone. We have a saturated market. And if you're going to offer progressive technology or enhanced technology, I don't personally like the word new because new means it's unproven. So you're always building on something. It has to be impactful. Yes, there's the whole game in, logistics and procurement and where you're going to warehouse this. Are you going to do a regional strategy? Have you gone after GPOs and IDNs? Have you cultivated early adopters? And then do you align your go-to-market strategy around a particular GPO you got on because it's regional or national? All those things have to be considered. Regardless, if you don't have voice of customer, you don't have market intel, you don't have a product that's going to resonate, and you don't understand who's going to pay for it, you're way behind.
I'm glad you brought up the voice of customer because Rob brought that up a second ago too. and the misnomer, and thank you, Rob, for pointing out that is an area of expertise that we manage. The misnomer for voice of customer market insights and analysis is something that you do once, right? So we see so many companies that come to us when they were in the ideation stages, when they were in the conceptual design stages, et cetera. And they're like, yeah, we did a voice of customer then. Great. You have now learned so much since then, and you should be consistently learning. What have you done recently? Have you talked to customers recently? Have you talked to people, not just the clinical specialist? Have you talked to people in value analysis? Have you talked to people in supply chain? Have you gotten any sort of voice of customer from those people? Right? One of the things that I'm seeing more and more prevalent in terms of go-to-market strategy is those companies that raise the $2 million to hire this sales force that's going to cover this great land from Maine to San Diego, okay, are the ones that fail the first. Those that take a very surgical approach and say, I'm going to launch in Tampa, Florida, because we did a voice of customer and we cross-analyzed it against a landscape assessment that Rob provided that showed that the majority of the patient subbase is in the southeast part of the United States. And rather than spend $2 million on 10 sales reps and spread out everything, we're going to get really quote unquote surgical. Okay? Because if you aim small, you miss small. And everybody in our world aims big and they miss big. And that's how you get to this massive burn rate. So voice of customer and landscape assessment, if you're doing it properly, it is an ongoing situation. And that is when you evaluate and you say, you know what? Tampa has a great bed of Bay State and Tampa General, and we're going to start in that area. And then we're going to work over to Orlando. And then we're going to find a way to get to the Miami and South Beach. And then we'll migrate into Georgia. And then now next thing you know, we've got 4 sales reps, then 7 sales reps, and we've hit this critical mass. And Vas, I'm going to turn it over to you. When we talk about production planning, trying to analyze, and the question just came in from the market on production planning, that's what it kind of elicited this thought for me, is when you talk about production planning and all of a sudden you've got these 10 reps scouring the US, and no rep is ever going to tell you that they're not going to hit quota. Okay. And at this stage, anybody who's played VP of sales is playing a strong guessing game at setting quotas. That's all it really is. Yeah, there's math involved, but the reality is it's all hypothetical guessing games, right? And production volumes are set on that. So Vas, how? And again, this is basically the question from the audience. How do we set production volumes? And do you think that's a more better approach to take in aiming small from that perspective?
Well, at this particular point, there is a lot dependent on how much money you have, right? And how certain you are in the product, right? On one hand, you can take a risk and, you feel like your product is very similar to whatever your predicate was. You know that FDA will approve it. Well, not approve it. Will let you market the device. So you're good there. So, and you have money. So now you can minimize the cost of the product and increase production, right? You can right away go with expensive multi-cavity tools to get your automation, etc. And I would say very rare does that happen, right? Because most of the time you're doing the product. I mean, if you're a large company, that's going to happen more often. But if you're a smaller company, you want to minimize the risk, right? So basically, you probably have less expensive one cavity tool. Your cost is probably at the top of what market can take. You probably are going to start selling and losing some money potentially just to prove the market, to make sure that there is market out there. And now are sitting there, and that's, I guess your question is, you guessing, when do you go and start investing in more expensive tools? Like, do you manufacture 1,500 parts at first and hope that somebody's going to buy you, which we kind of discussed that it's no longer the case in majority of the time. And in most cases, a larger company would want you to show that you can sell numerous amount of product, like 250,000, whatever, and only then are they going to talk to you with regards to purchase. So now you're minimizing your cost. You're trying to say, well, okay, we're going to manufacture 1,500 units. We're going to go out there. We're going to do initial market touch, like you said, with one salesperson, with one place, and try to expand, and then get more salespeople, produce more product. So it's just evaluation of your situation and trying to figure out, do you want to make it more now and fail, or do you want to make less and then be in the situation where you're not going to meet the demand? Hopefully you had a good plan, a good support group that gave you exact, middle where you need to be.
Well, any final assemblies at this point are truly at risk, right, Vas? I mean,
they are. I mean, you still go out there, you still get your salesperson into the market. You show the doctors how it's being used. You can start training the doctors. So it's not entirely, completely lost. But yes, if FDA is not going to give you approval, you are done. Or the other potential is that you did not evaluate your market correctly. You have a product that you think is good. You're going out there, you're talking to doctors, and they don't want it. And that's worst case scenario, because if with FDA, you probably can do an extra test, have an extra conversation, give them more information. If doctors do not accept it, there is very little you can do.
So, Frank, coming back to you, in that aim small, miss small philosophy, is that something that you're advising clients right now? And if so, how do you keep investors appeased?
We got to manage expectations. So I'm going to build a little bit or add a little bit to what Vas has said, because even if you have all the right data, you go to market and it comes out of FDA, if you don't know the space, and when I say space, I'm talking med surge, physician preference items, capital, all the different areas, biologics. You got to know your space, because you could be blocked by GPOs. You could have a major incumbent on a GPO. It could be the major GPOs we know or regional GPO, and they could have a 3-year agreement. And then you got investors that put a bridge round in, and they're expecting that go-to-market top line sales to be coming through. And you're kind of like, we're blocked at this point. And we haven't really forecast correctly. And we don't understand our own backyard. And then what happens is companies want to shift, right? So then they look for a Band-Aid approach, a small approach. Maybe I go into extended care, maybe go after an ASC or non-acute, right? Because I have a play there. And then they don't understand those distribution channels. So if your scope of work and your deliverables are aligned in terms of managing expectations, you're just constantly spinning your wheels. You got a high burn rate, and you're going for another round. And next thing you know, you've built a large cap table because you're on a C round, and you are saying, hey, I need more money to go to market, and there's no top line sales coming in. I mean, I see
C round.
Oh,
I've seen companies at H rounds these days.
Right. And when they show that they've been out there for 10 years, because they went through a huge learning curve because they didn't bring in experts, then they got to lick their wounds, right? And we see it all the time. I'm right now building a go-to-market plan, commercialize a saturated space based on the GPO adoption that we have. And it's going to coincide with the opportunities and how we're going to justify putting W-2 reps there. So we'll probably do a hybrid model of stocking distributors, W-2s, and then understand what's that ROI going to look like in 9 months, 12 months, 18 months.
So, Rob, so many companies come out and they do that shotgun approach, right? What is the merit of going shotgun instead of sniper?
Well, that's a loaded one. Yeah, and going shotgun, it's just, again, I go back to risk mitigation. You're not mitigating much risk at that point because you're blindfolded. And to really simplify it's like planning a vacation for anybody who's going on vacation, for those who are planning a small business or planning just any kind of extracurricular activity. You've got to have information here that you can bank on to know that it's going to work, and that you really quantify and justify the data that you're getting, and it's the right plans. I mean, for years, what we had when we were going to drive down the highway, we had maps. It showed us how to get there. This is, and I'm taking a simple approach here, but that's essentially what we've got to do. We've got to know where we stop at, what we build upon. And I go back to voice of the customer, Skender, of what you guys do and do well, and even Vas, because Vas taps into this information beforehand to help justify and quantify the products. But as it goes forward with the voice of the customer, who better to go to and to make sure it's unbiased, that you have enough sampling. And that's exactly what you guys do very well, that leads into the landscape. And that kind of builds from that point of going, this truly is the market. This is really the product. This is where part of the market share that a competitor has. And this is what is happening at the political arena up in Washington on new bills, of bills that may squash reimbursement or change the reimbursement for that product, and which of course has an impact on its success over and above the contractual agreements that they have in the marketplace. So there's the dynamics, it's very fluid. And so when you look at people taking the shotgun approach, that's a blindfold. That's just, hoping that it's going to work, and hope is not a strategy, as you well know. But taking an analytical look at it, I'm not saying go through analysis paralysis. I'm just saying make sure that you're touching on some of the critical factors that we've been talking about here, especially in looking at that data and what you're hanging your hat on to say that that's what we're going to be need in order to take this to execution.
Well, the paradox of voice of customer that I like to tell people is it goes back to, I don't know if it was Socrates or Plato. I think it was Socrates, but basically, and I'm going to bastardize his quote, but it's the more you know, the less you know. Right. Right. And so that's the conundrum with voice of customer is you think you know a lot, then you go and ask people questions, and then you come back, you go, man, I don't really know anything. And then but it's supposed to be a constant series of adaptations, adapting to the things that you're hearing, modifying your plan, doing things in accordance with what you're hearing out there. And that's where that sniper approach allows you to be more flexible. When you go shotgun and you go out there and you set up this massive sales channel, whether it be direct reps, multiple distributor groups, et cetera, now you're pinholed, and the ability to adapt and modify becomes much more difficult the larger you are, the larger your approach is, right? Vas, you want to add something to that?
Well, I think that a lot of companies have money to go shotgun approach in the first place, right? I mean, it costs a lot of money. So if you are trying to save your cash, the sniper way is the way to go. Plus, it's going to allow you to pivot really much faster, as you said.
In the first 2 years of a company's commercialization life, the amount of pivots that you have to make, if you are intelligent, right? And this is the conundrum. If you are a VP of sales and marketing and you were just hired by this group and you've gone through the whole, series of inquisitions, not interviews, inquisitions from senior management and the board, it is hard to come out and say, yeah, this is the strategy I created, and now we're going to pivot from that strategy, right? It's hard, Frank. I mean, as a commercialization leader, it is hard to admit, what I said 2 months ago. We might need to change that a little bit, right? People have a hard time doing that. They may know that they have to pivot, but it's hard to admit that as a commercialization leader. Do you see that happening often?
What's common sense isn't always common practice. I'm not trying to be cute here, but in a lot of ways, what we say is obvious, and I hope our audience really respects that. The IQ that we've acquired over the years is truly impactful if you follow it. I can recall a company where they had investors and they formed a board because they had a good exit, but they came from another industry. They came outside of healthcare. And all they did was see the IP of a developer who acquired some technology from a hospital shelf. And then they wanted to go to market. And I remember sitting down with them, talking exactly what we're talking about. And you know what? They're like, get out of the room. We got this, right? And guess what? That company shelved. Their burn rate was $300,000 a month. They went for a bridge round to feed their burn, right? It's kind of a told you so moment. So if you want to be humbled in life, you understand that there's people that have done this for a long time. I was a VP at a large British company. Took them 10 years. They had plenty of money. Took them 10 years to figure out what product was going to be adopted in the US. And when they realize that they can surround themselves with experts, the product that they commercialized a product that they never even had originally in their portfolio, right? Because they were receptive to what the market wanted. And that's where they made changes. So you can pivot, but you can't have pride get in your way. And that's fine. But unfortunately, we're human. We make mistakes. We have a board we have to answer. We have to save faces as CEO because we told something 3 months ago, 6 months, or a year ago, right? So there's a path. You just got to know where that alignment is and be receptive to it.
Pride, ego, and greed. Something in history tells me those three things have a combination somewhere, and I don't remember where it was, but those are usually a downfall of humanity somewhere. Rob, question from the audience here. What customer discovery data resonates most with potential investors?
Well, obviously, the clinical trials, as you come from that, the voice of the customer and the targeted market is really I guess, the emphasis of getting good data. If I'm understanding this question, so and especially when you're talking to investors, that they're going to want to know that where's the spend, what is the return, and which market, but also which markets can we scale to over and above the targeted market. So that's some areas that really has a lot of focus.
Good. Another question, Vas, coming in from the audience here. As you're scaling up manufacturing, what factors do you need to consider to maintain regulatory compliance and quality control?
Well, regulatory compliance, FDA has a fairly simple chart that basically lets you follow and figure out if you do or do not need to refile 510K based on changes that you are making. Usually, if you are staying with the same processes and same materials and just utilizing more efficient path, i.e., if you started with one cavity tool and now you're using 20 cavity tool, you can proceed without just kind of memo to file and internal quality evaluation. But now, if you do need to change a bigger situation, like, I don't know, material or some design change, then you follow the chart and figure out if you do go back to FDA. Now, with regards to quality, I think as you are increasing volume of your production, your quality effort automatically has to increase with it, right? I mean, it is most of the time easier to produce 10 units and take your time to ensure that they are well assembled rather than when you are producing thousands and thousands of units. So your manufacturing processes have to improve to be able to sustain the quality requirements that you have. Your in-process inspection has to improve. Your, basically everything associated with the process, your inventory control, your chain, the supply chain has to be proven to be able to withstand such increase. And you basically have to plan and plan for that, right? You have to start, even when you are manufacturing low quantity, if you know that you're going to have to go into the larger quantity production, you have to start evaluating everything around you and make sure that, hey, this supplier may be good for low quantities, but we're not going to be able to stay with them for larger quantities. And you have to start inspecting the other suppliers.
Yeah, I mean, this stage in the manufacturing and inventory buildup process is so critical, right? It's so hard to find that 100% fulfillment rate. It never happens, right?
It doesn't. It's very stressful in most of the cases because, I mean, you can have the problem of, oh, I have the inventory, I have the process, but no market. I mean, that's a terrible way to be, right? You pretty much wasted the money. But being on the other, having a good problem per se, where you discover the market, but you have no inventory or processes that are able to supply larger quantity, that is just as stressful, right? You hope to be in the middle, but I mean, so far it rarely happens.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest companies don't get it right.
To add to what Vas was saying, and especially going back to what we're talking about here on some of the data, the intel of why we're going to do what we're going to do, is that you can go back and look at a product, depending on the product. You can go back and look at the product and go, how much of this is being used at a certain hospital at a given place in the country, wherever it may be. Do you have that data, especially if you're doing exactly what Frank was talking about, at targeting a trial area to see if that product is going to work? Well, what procedures do we know that they're going to be using? How much of this are they going to be using? What seems to be the price points that they're buying this at, and why would they take that on over and above what they are already currently doing? So we can dig deep into that and start to disclose or at least surface some of that information that even Vas would use for production.
Yeah. Frank, I want to come back to something that you referenced before, and I think it's one of the conundrums that everybody faces at this stage. And you talked a little bit about in your anecdote about the company that you were supporting, and it's the sales distribution channels. Okay. Every commercialization leader has these machinations of having a field sales force of 50 sales reps dedicated solely to them and their needs, running out there, quoting every message, growing business by the millions and exceeding quota by double digits every quarter right off the bat. However, capital limitations at this point sometimes state it's expensive to have direct sales reps. So therefore, a lot of companies have to go the distribution and independent sales rep model, et cetera, at this stage. How can you optimize that calculus if you have, and I'm asking you a loaded question. I do understand that. But what are some of the ways that companies can try to optimize that calculus at this standpoint where they're not flush with capital? They may not be able to have, and again, talking kind of still in a potentially sniper approach, how can they approach this? How do they know what distribution and sales channel is most optimized for their needs?
We treat every client we work with as if it's our own business. And if I had to look at anybody that I had to answer to where I'm putting boots on the ground and I have a strategy, how am I going to justify that? The first thing, and I can't emphasize this enough, is have your pricing dialed in. Why do I say that? A lot of times they don't factor in all the margins. They don't factor in all the fees. Next thing you know, you have to pay a sales rep. You have to pay a manager, maybe a VP of sales. You have to pay a GPO. You might have to give fees to a distributor. If you don't factor that all in, you're sometimes challenged with how you're going to get adoption from a distribution channel. So if you have no base of business in a particular state and you're asking to work with 1099s or stocking distributors, there's a huge risk on their end because they're going to have to put 9 months to a little over a year before they start to see any results from their efforts. And because they're putting up their own capital to go out there and represent your product, it better be worth it. You can't be coming at wanting someone to pioneer your product at 15% commission rate, right? It doesn't make good business sense. So you got to really look at those aspects. When you get into how do I decide if I'm going to work with a stocking distributor? And by the way, if you work with a stocking distributor, this is another big mistake I see all the time. They go out there, they get some early adopters, the stocking distributors buying the product, putting their mark up, and the next thing you know, the company gets a GPO, a regional GPO, a national GPO, maybe 2 GPOs, right? And now you got to adhere to GPO pricing. Now you got a price point through the stocking distributor that's higher than some of the tiered pricing structures you have with your GPO. You have to be super cognizant of that. But in terms of how do I get going much sooner than later? 1099s, what's that require? That requires a contract that's negotiated and what commission they're going to get and training. And then what targets and how you're going to help bridge those targets because you have an initiative with those aggregation groups or IDNs in their region. When you do stocking distributors, they're procuring the item, the product. And then they're going to, sometimes these distributors are already aligned with major health systems, right? Like a Banner Health, like a Kaiser, like Providence St. Joe's. And they already have access, but now that pricing and that margin that they're given has to be competitive to what's out there unless there's just a strong clinical value to it that feeds into that health economics that someone can measure 2 to 3 years out. So as you can see, there's a lot of variables that come into play. I wouldn't tell you that there's a template that just fits all. I think you got to look at your product category. I think you have to consider the competition. You consider your target audience. All those start to lend itself to, do I start here and then build on a hybrid model? I mean, I've been part of organizations where we had all 1099s and we shifted to W-2s. And we kept a couple 1099s because it made good business sense. And then I've seen companies go from W-2s to 1099s because they were limited to getting access. Because that's another thing that you have to qualify. You know, if you have one product and you got W-2s and that health system is in a 3-year cycle with your competition, they don't have another lead-in product to get beyond the four walls. So those are things that you really, really got to consider in your go-to-market efforts.
Yeah, I think the key takeaway is don't cut your nose to spite your face, right? There are so many little mistakes that you can make here, and I've already made one biblical reference to 7 sins. We'll throw in another one, right? Sometimes those stocking distributors are like that forbidden apple in that Garden of Eden, right? I mean, it becomes disillusioning because now all of a sudden you're this commercial leader and you're like, look, I just got us our first $100,000 sale, and it's a stocking distributor, and then they lose sight of what happens beyond that, right? And that's what I'm talking about. Don't cut your nose to spite your face. If you're going to, stocking distributors can be a very effective model, but I feel like so many people take their foot off the gas because they've just shown their investors and their board, look at this, $100,000 order to start off. That's not real sales. That is somebody stocking your product, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's why everything that you decide here can't be done with any sort of long-term blinders.
No, and that would be a bump. And you reminded me, what was it, 25 years ago or something, new to sales. And we landed a major agreement. It was for like multiple states. I think it was between California, Utah, Idaho, and Oregon or something. And we went back to the account manager and we just didn't have the product. We couldn't deliver. We closed the deal. And the supplier was not ready because nobody had forecasts. I mean, we had it in our pipeline, but it came to fruition, sooner than later, and we couldn't deliver on that. And that was, you just reminded me of that. So I just thought I'd share that briefly. But those are little things that could happen to anybody. And those bumps, I mean, I remember we sold capital to IHC, which never made any sense because we had kind of the razor blade concept, right? Where we gave the capital predicated on a 3-to-1 ratio disposable. But IHC was just they wanted to buy the capital for whatever reason. I can, that I won't go into, but the point is that would be a bump in the numbers, right? But we saw that post 2020 where a lot of big bumps because there was back orders and inventory control, right? But then what happens is the companies want to keep that bump. They get that huge bump and then they want to hold it there and they want to build on that. And depending on the product category, sometimes you just can't do that. I mean, I saw that with a company that was doing, I won't use their name, but they're in California and they did all the suits, the like hazmat suits and the respirators that go into some of the most critical areas of healthcare. I mean, this is a company that almost went from like 10 million to 100 million, right? But I'm sure they settled back down to, pre-2020, conditions.
Hard to get used to that lifestyle once you've had a taste, right?
Right.
And that's why we're all wearing clothes and not leaves anymore. So, all right, we're approaching the very top of our time here. So with that, I'm going to ask round robin. Let's, as we close out this Medtech Momentum series, and as we are, right, in summation, I'm going to ask you each to provide, and we'll just go first. Think about what are the main pitfalls at this stage you want companies to really think about, okay? And then we're going to come back round robin again, and everybody provide some insight. Just what is that one last piece of information you really want people to concentrate? Forget the pitfall. You've already talked about that. But let's talk about that really successful point that people can leverage and grow from. So, Vas, we'll come to you first. What is your pitfall?
So I have experienced that few times is when the company planning to, and we discussed that, but it's just devastating if it happens. The company puts all their money into development of the product, and their exit strategy is to purchase or acquisition by a different larger company, what have you, or competitor. And they get to that point and they have the product is good, but they don't get the acquisition, but they already spent all their money. So now they do not have anything to start selling on their own, right? They cannot afford that sales force that may be required at this point. And I mean, it's devastating. So I would say have that finances, even if you're not planning to use it, plan to have it so you can, just in case your original strategy did not go forth.
Like cutting up your wife's credit card bill. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Rob, how about you? Pitfalls.
Yeah, I see this so often is that you see, the definition of madness is obviously doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. And it really goes back to taking the shortcuts, not getting the information that you need to have a sound, if you're looking at a publicly held company, they're going to give guidance calls. What do you think they're basing that off of? They're going to give certain projections. What do you think they're basing that off? A lot of times they will scrub, hoping that, or expecting that they're going to fall within those numbers to, one, reflect that they know what they're doing, but two, is to be accurate and excite the market. The same applies to your business, is that you've got to make sure that you get that right intel, especially on some of the critical factors. You're checking the boxes. And too often we see that people make the same products like lipstick on a pig. You go and recover it and expect it's going to blow up in the marketplace, to find out you had a big failure and spent a lot of money doing it. So that's what I see quite often.
Frank.
How many calls we sit on and we're talking about sales and growth and we're talking about products, and you know what I remind myself of? I got into healthcare because I cared. I want to see better outcomes for a patient. I would encourage anybody to put the patient first and build it backwards, is how I look at it. Because if it helps with outcomes and really solves pain points for patients, for hospitals, for best practices, the cost of care, I think you got a tremendous product. And then be fortunate you really did something. I think too many times everyone wants to create quick valuation, looking for an M&A strategy, all these other things. And it's sad to say, I get on these calls and patient never even comes up. It's all about cost sometimes. And I've learned over the years that if you really have an impact on someone's life, that the product and the adoption and everything will unfold, right?
Don't lose sight of the patient.
No.
Love it.
Yeah.
All right, Vas, back to you. Final point. Leave the audience with something.
I'll make two final points. The first one is align yourself with people that know what they're doing. In what is it, sales? Is it product development? Is it regulatory? And not just general sales, but sales in the area of your product, right? Is it, cardiovascular catheter? Is it brain implant? Make sure that people did brain implants before they sold them. They know the regulatory path for it. Basically, you have a good knowledgeable people around you. And the second one, do your research as soon as you can. Don't leave it for the end. Whatever information you can get, as soon as you can get it. Because if you get information later and it's not information that you're expected, that can be a very pricey mistake.
Rob, how about you?
Yeah, not to make this cliche, but so often we take a product to take it through value analysis committee at a hospital for acceptance, right? Take that same approach and apply it to your business. Find out the value that you're getting out of with your production or with your development, your production, and also the data that you have to be able to have a high level value over and above what you're going to market with, especially to the end users, like Frank said, to the customer, that it's really hitting the price points and also the safety for the patients. So when you start looking at a product, make sure you understand the value of what you're doing and really taking that to a high regard before you go to the next step.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And finally, the smooth sounds of Frank Ripullo coming to us, who is temporarily in New York City, but ironically is the only person to have ever commuted from California to New York and got quieter. Never happened in history before.
Yeah.
Frank, what's your final piece here?
We're all good souls. I want our audience to understand, just pick up the phone and call us. Maybe a little old fashioned. Just call us. We'll have a discovery call. It costs you nothing. And it'll probably be the best call you've ever made. And I'll leave it at that.
Love it. And my final piece is just remember, success is just a series of experiments, failures, and adaptations, right? Don't be afraid. Aim small, miss small, make an adaptation, modify, and success will come in anything you do. So if the audience just keeps that, commercialization is no different than anything else. So looking forward to it. We encourage everybody to please follow the video link and take a look. Please contact these experts. These are people who have experience, who've been in the trenches, can share with you the war stories so you don't have to make those mistakes. Save some of your capital, save some of your time, and be able to start on a much more successful foot. So thank you to the audience. We appreciate you following this Medtech Momentum journey with us. We look forward to speaking with any of you that have questions in the future. And panelists, thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Right there, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.